Is there truth in photography? Can photography be objective? Is this a documentary photograph or a staged performance? What does street photography reveal about the subject? These are some of the questions that are posed by this photographer's work. And of course, we're looking at the work of Philip-Lorca diCorcia. Big questions that I think a lot of photographers struggle with. Can a picture stand alone, or does it need to be part of a series? Can a singular portrait tell the audience something? Can photography ever tell the audience something? The good thing is his work is just intensely beautiful at the same time as being kind of intellectual photography. A description he would probably no doubt hate, but let's jump into it. There's a couple of notes about the way this video is going to go. There's a few key bodies of work that we're going to look at, and we're going to focus on interior family, exterior staged portraits, street photography, the series Hustlers, his fashion work for W Magazine, and of course Heads, the work that he's super well known for. In some respects it's kind of chronological, but we also jump around a little bit. So here's the key message. The photographs suggest, they don't explain. We live in a post-Instagram era, so we accept that photography is staged now, but there was definitely a period where people thought that photography may have some kind of element of truth to it. And to kind of dig into that, we're going to go right back to the beginning, his education and influences. Under the tuition of Jan Groover, whose work really focused on the idea of photography being about orchestrated planning. I love this quote from her. The idea of conceptually changing space. It's this compression of the frame in still life that I find really interesting. The idea of dividing up space, taking everyday objects and manipulating them through the medium of the camera. And you'll see how influential this was in his work. This idea of transforming pictorial space. The other thing I really like about her work, and it's only a small selection here, the idea of placing objects in relationship with each other that might not actually have a relationship, and what happens to them when the photographer puts them in some different context. How does a photographic picture change the way that we view objects in the world, or elements within the picture that we would see in a different light outside of the picture? It's always interesting to me how much subconscious information you take in as a photographer. There was a real wave of street photography. Gary Winogrand, Friedlander, Papa George. This idea of a kind of photographer roaming around the street, shooting thousands of pictures in the case of Winogrand, aiming to see what the world looked like in a photograph, but also compressing time into a frame from a very specific point of view. Those photographers impose themselves on the world. There's always that thing with street photography is how many frames did someone shoot to get to their final picture? In that image on the right, how much of the passers-by on the street just reacting to Winogrand being really quite in their face? Is there any truth in that street photography? Winogrand and Friedlander are particularly different, but they're of a certain kind of subset of New York-based street photography. We will eventually get to diCorcia's version of street photography, but as you'll see here, it's kind of really different. And diCorcia has indicated in interviews that he kind of wanted to move away from the sense of chaos that street photography could bring, take an opposite approach. But before we get there, we're going to dig into some of the early work. The idea of photography as an orchestrated act, preconceived, not a reactive one. This image, Mario, is a picture of diCorcia's brother. The thing we'll see again and again in his work is the kind of questions it asks of us as a viewer. Who is this person? What are they doing? Is this a portrait? Is it staged? And now with the benefit of hindsight, we can look at it and say, yes, there's a flash hidden in the fridge, adding that drama and that light to the image. A lot of diCorcia's work is about where the viewer is meant to look and controlling the subject with light. Later on in the video, I'll show you some of the Polaroid test shots, which really reinforce the idea that everything is tightly choreographed. diCorcia studied with Nan Golding, and they went on completely different routes. Nan Golding was about shooting her circle of friends, and diCorcia makes a series Family and Friends, but they couldn't be more separate. It's people doing the everyday things. They kind of look like snapshots, but the more you look at them, the more you realize there's something artificial and staged and managed going on in the picture. And the more you tend to want to look at the picture to try and get some sense of meaning from it. We kind of know, looking at this picture of Max, that this is not a snapshot. Just even from the way that all the verticals and horizontals are pretty perfectly aligned. And what diCorcia does with light, especially small elements of gelled light, so little flashlights hidden within the frame or somewhere outside of the frame, providing accents of color, like on the dog in the foreground. The light can be misleading also. You'd expect, say, the light to be coming from the direction of the window, or the light to be coming through the door. But here it's doing neither of those things. We're like within the door frame. Where is that light coming from? Obviously it's a flashlight on the floor, but when you read it as a singular picture, it's kind of intriguing. This one does have those kind of snapshot elements to it, the blur of the motion of the person on the right of the frame. But again, there's elements of like the shoes and the necklace that look a little bit staged. There's that mix of ambient light and interior light that could really only come from a staged photograph. I'm not going to talk about each image individually, but this sense of intrigue about who are these characters? Why are they here? Why are they in the frame? Why has someone chosen to photograph them? What are we meant to learn about them? Who is this boy? Whose kitchen is this? Where is the photographer? Why does the boy have a torch in daylight in the woods? Who is he looking at? Is he looking at us, the audience, or is he looking at the photographer? And diCorcia also moves from the interior to the exterior. And it's an interesting jump because staging interior shots in small rooms is kind of easy, but orchestrating that in the outside world can be really challenging. And you kind of see diCorcia learning his craft. Again, like who is this woman? Why is there a slightly voyeuristic feel to the low down angle? Does the person know they're there? It kind of asks these questions, but doesn't ever give you the answer. There's a perfect framing of the scooter guy, how it sits within that arc that kind of transforms across the picture and leads your eye back into the two on the other side. Endless loop of composition. And this series of family and friends is just a really intriguing list of characters. There's a theatrical feel to some of the images. And diCorcia apparently hates that description of his photographs being cinematic, but also maybe some of that is a reaction to the cinematic photographers that came afterwards, the Crutzens of the world. There's a sense also that his pictures can exist just really as singular images. Like the composition here is beautiful. Who is this person on the chair? Why are they there? Why are they looking at themselves in the mirror? Did they move the chair into that position? This is a pretty significant picture in terms of his career arc. Classic New York subway image. Maybe you're familiar with the New York subway images that, say, Walker Evans took with his hidden camera, or Bruce Davison took with his flash on and his kind of spontaneous searching out subject matter. Who is Igor? Why has he got a fish in a bag? Why is he not looking at the camera? Does he know the portrait is being taken? Of course he knows the portrait is being taken. Do we know anything about his thinking at this point? Is he relaxed? The more that you look at them, the more you realize they are constructed. There's a sense of character, humans playing a role, but I don't know what the role is. The audience won't know because there's not enough clues in the picture. You begin to kind of think about this interior world. Who is Alice? Why is she caught in this sort of daze? Is she awake? Is she sleeping? There's a dreaming quality, but you can see with the motion blur of the train that she's been static for a while. And then the staging gets more elaborate. For example, this image of Fred. Has he fallen? Why is he on the floor? Why are his glasses placed carefully in front of him? The motion blur of the hand. And diCorcia flits between these elements, small motions of staging, and then dramatic moments that again you learn nothing more from. If you think of the kind of classic William Klein street photography, maybe he'll show you 5 or 6 frames so you can begin to understand what was going on. For showing you the contact sheet and then circling the image that they want to show off, but they need the other pictures either side of it to actually support the story. diCorcia's not doing that. He's doing the opposite, just showing you this random moment. Who is Hilton? Why is he caught in this daze? Why is he pouring his drink out? diCorcia's children, I believe. There's so much tension in the frame. That real careful balance of artificial light and ambient light. A sense of movement, but what is going on? Yet at the same time, it's still a beautiful picture. It's a great quote of diCorcia as the artist. So it gives you a sense of the person. And let's move into Hustlers. Hustlers is an important piece of work because it kind of put diCorcia on the map, but also he got arts funding at that point. It's an era of strong censorship in America. diCorcia sets out with a really clear idea of what he wants to go and do, the people he wants to photograph, and how he wants to manage that. And he pushes the work into different areas. Is this documentary? Is it portraiture? Is it staged portraiture? It's kind of all of those elements at once, and also none of them, because he's not aiming to tell us anything more about the subject than the description in the title, and then visually what we can see. We know nothing about how they arrived at this point in their life, or what they're thinking. We don't understand the interaction between the photographer and the subject. diCorcia is reacting against the political situation of the time, and the impact of HIV or AIDS on a community. But even the fact that diCorcia chooses to focus on male sex workers is interesting, because if you think of the idea of like the female in photography, that notion of the muse, or how the female form is kind of manipulated, objectified by photographers over and over again. Maybe diCorcia is pushing against that by choosing to focus on men, or how they portray themselves, the characters they play. This image of William, I think, is a great way of looking at it. There's all those barriers between the audience and the subject. You've got those really strong red dividers, immediately pushes you away as the audience. And then the subject is behind shadow, behind a window. We get no sense that we can hear, understand, or know this person, yet they are being revealed to us, and why. That blue light really kind of plays so strongly against the reds. He is a master of really controlled lighting. Beautiful sense of composition with this image, pushing a subject and a TV together. The iconic of the time, Bill Cosby. There's political identity here, there's racial identity, there's a performative sense. There's an idea that this subject is kind of trapped in the mirror, because obviously we're just looking at a reflection of the subject. The work was made in the early 90s. diCorcia made 5 trips to Los Angeles, driving along Santa Monica Boulevard until he found people that he wanted to photograph. He would then approach them, ask them their rate, but tell them he only wanted to take their photograph. In the meantime, he would have sourced a location he wanted the photograph to occur in, set something up with his assistant, got some lighting in place, tested some imagery, and then bring the subject to the place. We know they are street hustlers, so there's a documentary element. The locations are real. The exchange of money is real. The kind of objectification of the people is real. But when it's all combined together, it becomes this sort of semi-fiction that moves it into a different area than classic documentary. So a couple of things that really stand out for me about this is the richness of the ideas. diCorcia doesn't just go to a classic like a motel and repeat the same picture. He's inventive with his lighting. He's inventive with his framing and his narrative, giving us a little bit to read into the picture, but not enough to understand it completely. Seems to me to have a real strong sense of directing what he wants from the subject. He's pushing against the idea Is there truth in documentary photography? Or is photojournalism just sort of telling you what you already know? Is it just fulfilling your expectation? If you go to take a portrait of someone as a photographer, do you really learn anything about them, or are you just imposing your ideas on them? This image is quite renowned, the Marilyn, and DeCorcia has an interesting viewpoint on this. It's like the most obvious images of his that audience is really engaged with, which he seems to really dislike that. So he creates this body of work that kind of looks candid, but is hyper-controlled. Has a Hollywood feel, obviously. He's in Los Angeles. There's elements of staging, no clear narrative. There's no decisive moment. It's kind of anti-photography. DeCorcia's brother was gay, and it's interesting we never learn about the interior lives of these subjects. He doesn't follow them around in the way a photojournalist would. He's not embedded in their life. He's not like a Larry Clark who will associate himself with a group for a long time. We know nothing more than the picture shows us. But also we don't know anything about the photographer from this work. If you think of Nan Golding's work in A Ballad of Sexual Dependency, you understand Nan Golding through the slideshow. Her position, her point of view, her feelings. You understand her because she shows you herself, but also the real difficult relationships that she's having with people. You could look at Hustlers over and over and not really understand anything more about DeCorcia. The other thing that's interesting about Hustlers is he was doing this without permits. He had a sort of run and gun approach to working, which also I think is really helpful in understanding his lighting. It's a quick setup, small flashes, you can move, shoot, go to the next location. He was shooting on a 6x7 Linhof camera, so it's a view camera, it's got a plate on the back. Allows a really perfect, precise, detailed composition, which is also why his verticals are so perfectly straight. So he would bring the subject into his kind of choreographed moment. The other thing also of shooting on a large format camera like that, or 6x7, is he's able to make really big, beautiful prints. And if you think of the period of time that he's working in, there's a lot of 35mm snapshot photography, and he wants to make pictures that are big that kind of compete with the sense of painting. If you put a painting in a gallery and a small 35mm print, people are going to look at the painting, and he wants to challenge that. So let's take a leap, a different tempo, and look at DeCorcia's street photography. And DeCorcia takes some of the approach that he's already worked on, this idea of staging moments, putting flashes within a scene to accent, to kind of control where the audience looks, but also to give some sense of narrative to the person he's photographing. So he goes out onto the streets of New York, classic street photographer landscape, puts some flashes on some poles or scaffolding, or street corners, and begins to go to work. Kind of realized that people withdraw into themselves on the street. And he made two series of work, Streetwork 93 to 97, and Heads, which is 2000, 2001. And I think the thing to keep in mind is like, what position does he take as a street photographer? Is he showing us the drama of the street, poverty, social inequality? Is he just showing us like passion or people that he's drawn to? Or maybe he's doing none of those things. Maybe you know nothing more about the people by looking at them. I think this description of what he wants to achieve with his work is really relevant to his street photography. And if you look at the frame, look how on the right hand side of the frame, those flashes really bring the characters forward, or the subject matter. The sense of movement, it's very fluid, this picture, but also frozen in time because of the effect of the strobe. This for me is like his perfect street photography. There's nothing that you can know from the frame. Again, it works as a singular image. It has a cinematic lighting, but it's almost at the perfectly wrong time to take the picture. He obviously would have had to shoot over the series hundreds of pictures to get these compositions. I also really enjoy the fact that the way it's lit, it really looks like it's on a soundstage. That backdrop looks fake. It looks like it's rear projected. There's a theatrical element of the street, but again, it's not giving you a clear indication of what the story is or the message. Why are we looking at this person? What is the point of this picture? The way everyone is looking at us as the audience, and in the far left, that person that's kind of framed against that little ray of light on the wall. If you see this as a big print, it's kind of a magical print. And the expression on this guy's face, that little slither of light, the drama of this scene, those kind of silhouettes, it looks kind of Hitchcock in a way. And just coming back to that early Winogrand shot on the left, they're kind of almost the same picture, but done in a completely different way. The framing is almost the same. The crowd kind of looks the same. That guy pushing his way through the middle is almost the same character, but more contemporary. And of course, DeCorcia was using color. A very conscious choice to use color photography. Color photography had such a commercial background. It wasn't really viewed as fine art, especially when it came to street photography. John Sokowski was the photography director for Modern Art Museum in New York. Super influential guy. Kind of dictated who the photographers are that we all talk about still now. The Stephen Shores, Jeff Wall, that kind of great canon of photographers, very much decided by his critical eye. And we're going to leave street photography with this image of Curly. There's several images that kind of could work here. There's that contemporary movie feel. He looks like he's been dressed by the costume department. It looks like maybe he's waiting for that guy to turn the corner. Maybe he's a hitman. Like, there's so many narratives that you make as a viewer, but none of them are true and you will never know. And I think that's the thing that's really exciting and interesting about his work. Like, you may be looking at this and have a completely different impression of it than I do. And I would hope so. If you're still with me, we're going to get to fashion. His work for W magazine. And it's really significant this. He shot for them for 13 years and really established the magazine. His work had a mixture of people that lived around the location or where he was photographing, and also models, and then people he would just cast himself. They're like completely removed from fashion photography that was happening at the time. And also these are big budget photo shoots. Nothing like this would happen anymore. They're interesting to me because they're not about the clothes, they're not about the fashion, although the styling is really important in the storytelling. But you know, when you look at a lot of fashion magazines and you just get a sense, well, this designer or this brand has bought 5 full-page ads in this magazine, so that's why I'm seeing this picture. His editorials were completely different and more freeform. There's a great story about this image. He'd been shooting in a studio for days, and he said he was getting claustrophobic and he wanted to break out of that and go and shoot somewhere different. And someone knew the manager of one of the restaurants at the World Trade Center, so they went and set up this image. And again, you don't know what you're looking at. What is the story? Who are these people? Is this documentary? Are these just like rich New Yorkers, or are they models? And of course, in the W magazines, you would get some sense of like what the spread is eventually about, and there is a narrative within this picture. You see some of these characters again. They're really hard to find, but if you get a chance, try and find some of these full editorials. Even on like models.com, there's not a lot of them left. It's difficult to understand the impact of his photography now because fashion photography has kind of changed again because he did this. Like we wouldn't have, say, Nadia Lee Cohen's fashion photography existing if it wasn't for diCorcia's. And it's so deeply influential still. This is a great quote. I'll just leave it up so you can read it. I love what he says about prancing and jumping. He seems to hate fashion photography, but also welcomes the money and the budget that it gives him. He's also able, when he goes to do these shoots and when he does advertising photography, he'll take the crew and the location and shoot work for himself at the same time. Again, they're just perfect as individual images. This image could be obviously Lynchian, could be Mulholland Drive. He talks of his relationship with the magazine. I held them to ransom. Clearly the guy has an ego and a sense of self, but the work is worth it. Like this here is just fantastic. The thing that's also beautiful about the fashion photography is really working with the talent that he has around him, allowing their creative direction to come through as well. Like this kind of interplay of the color, the blue leather with that deep orange and the yellows of the tiles and that like vivid white. It's just the perfect lighting, and then there's like green tint to everything that's coming through. That mix of the artificial lighting and ambient lighting. It's hard to look at any of his fashion pictures and say that he's repeating himself. But if you look at a lot of contemporary fashion, you're like, it's just the same picture over and over again. And I understand why that happens because of budget and time, and no one has the resources they used to. But he's really pushing himself to make single images that really stand out, even if you don't like them. This really ties into the family portraits that he was taking in the late 70s. That early work that's so interesting. That thread is always there in his work. Like, who is this person? Why are they stood there? What are they doing? What are they looking at? Why are they not acknowledging us? Why are they stood in the corner of that room? Why are we there? It's the same concept as the Mario opening the fridge. There's tension, there's familiarity, there's a sense of unknowing, there's a staged element, there's an abundance of beautiful lighting. He's not afraid of a hard shadow and a strong highlight. He must shoot really slowly to create these pictures. And some of them just floor me every time I see them. If you can find it somewhere, there's a book called 11, which has these spreads in them. His travels around the world shooting for W magazine. It's crazy expensive. I think it's like $500 or something now if you find a copy. I have a copy, but I can't scan it. It's too big to scan properly. So let's look at Heads. Heads takes a similar approach to his early street photography. Flash again that's mounted up on scaffolding. He has an area that's marked out on the floor, but the people wouldn't know that. And it's just taking thousands of pictures and selecting a picture that has drama he wants to bring into the frame. It's not a huge body of work. There's an interesting story about this person suing him, which diCorcia actually won. But it's also challenging that idea of street photography. What is his right to reveal them to us in that way? Intensely strong flash just pretty much destroys the background. He doesn't need the ambient light, so they look like they're on a stage. That idea that the street is theater. And then some more conceptual work that he makes in East of Eden, which is sort of a post-banking collapse body of work. It's very much asking, like, what is America? He relates it to the book of Genesis, that loss of innocence, like what did America become? I really recommend you look out for this work individually. This image, obviously, the censoring is something that I've done to get it through YouTube. Again, it's worth looking to print large if you can. There's some digital manipulation that's occurred here and is part of the storytelling. There's the idea of family, myth-making, the Great American West, the American Dream. There's these isolated characters in the American landscape, seemingly lost. Who is this couple? What are they looking at? What is the dog doing? We can see it's artificially lit. We can see they're looking out of the frame. They're not looking at the photographer. What is happening? It's also about the commodification of America, the money of America. I can't show many of the pole dancer images because YouTube would censor it, but again, they're interesting. There's a lot of photography of women that can be really exploitative, obviously, and objectifying, but his pole dancer images are different to that. And there's a reappearance of his son. So his son appears in those early images. Here he is throwing a dart at his face. This has a very much a Jeff Wall feel to it. Again, I'd happily do a Jeff Wall video if anyone wants to see one. But you can see how beautiful these images look in a gallery space, how big those prints are. And I was really lucky to see 1,000 Polaroids, a small exhibition that he did, that really brings his work together. It was just the original Polaroids on the wall. You felt you could just steal them and put them in your pocket. And I think it works so perfectly to just end with a couple of these. To see these test images on the left of the Hustlers series, and then the final images on the right. It's good also for that idea of like, what does a Polaroid bring you? And then what does the large format negative give you? That sense of detail, that richness of color. And also see him testing ideas, testing composition and lighting. It's really interesting to me how the image on the right has a loose feel to it. It looks like he's familiar with the subject and it looks kind of like a snapshot. But again, think it's on a large format view camera. It's very hard to do. And there's always a thing about photography of like, what camera are you using and does it change your methodology? He really hates the Canon 5D and rants about them quite a bit in interviews. And I think that's interesting to know how the view camera, the Linhof 6.7, really shaped his understanding of photography. And if you think back to the imagery we looked at with Jan Groover at the beginning, who had that idea of changing space within a photograph, using objects to divide the frame. And you can really see that that's what he's done with his large format photography in a really intuitive way. This is a perfect image of what his tutor was describing. How do these objects transform space? How do they transform our understanding of what the picture is? It's an interesting concept to have a portrait of someone and just place them behind so many barriers. He put a lot of different images together in Storybook in 2003. I'll just let these play out as we just kind of wrap up here, because we should just kind of summarize what those main themes are and what we can kind of maybe learn from that. The idea of like, what is narrative storytelling? What can you learn objectively from photography? Is it documenting anything real? Can you twist the narrative? Does a portrait tell you anything? Or does it just tell you what the photographer thinks about the subject matter? This to me is a perfect summary. Unfortunately, it comes from diCorcia. This idea that your photograph is setting a trap for someone. You're leading them into the substance of the image. It's a beautiful way of describing it. And I think it's really helpful to think, okay, when you're next taking photographs, and it might be fashion, it might be portrait, what is the point of your picture? What are you trying to do? What is the real like substance of that image? And does it stand alone on its own? Or does it need like 5 pictures either side to really tell your story? And if it does, what can you put into that one single frame to make your story better? But then also that idea of ripping story out, that you don't have to show everything. Your audience can take something of their own. It's that classic like author advice of show, don't tell when you're writing a novel. So as you can tell, I love his work. I find it super interesting. It's beautifully lit, fantastic colors, incredible prints when you see them. And his influence on contemporary photography is still very clearly felt. Let me know in the comments if you find it interesting, if that deep dive was useful. And also maybe there's things you really disagree with. Like I try and spend time researching and giving my own opinion of this, but maybe you just reject that, and feel free to let me know in the comments in a nice way. And thanks again for watching, and everyone that supports the channel and all the really positive feedback I've been getting. I do really appreciate it. And to everyone that's subscribing, that's great. You're really welcome here, and have another video coming soon. Thank you.